Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing ability, or both? That's for you to decide. In this end of expansion lull, Blizzard decided to spice things up by giving us not only an Awoken season, but two side modes to go along with it. First, Plunderstorm with patch 10.2.6, and more recently, MoP Remix with patch 10.2.7. While I think most of us would have preferred the fourth raid tier that we used to get before Shadowlands, I do applaud Blizz for experimenting and giving us something unique to toy around with. And now that the latter is just about wrapped up, I thought it would be fun to compare the two and share my opinion about it. And I think this is probably going to be my first hot take of the show. I actually enjoyed Plunderstorm more than MoP Remix, but we'll get into that. Let's get right into it by comparing the gameplay. Plunderstorm is definitely an oddity. Aside from it using the WoW engine and WoW assets, it's essentially an entirely different game than WoW. Well, let's face it, it's a battle royale, and one that aesthetically feels an awful lot like Fortnite. Contributing to the alien feel of this game mode was the fact that you didn't actually play with any of your WoW characters. You created a new character whose appearance and race you could change at any point in time, and furthermore, all add-ons were disabled because Blizzard didn't really want to have to balance around those for a limited time event. I don't think any of this is inherently bad, although if it were a longer, more permanent event, I would prefer to be able to use my actual characters and add-ons, but for what it was, I think that was fine. Having said that, I can absolutely see how those factors would be a huge turnoff to somebody. Furthermore, at the end of the day, Plunderstorm was a PvP mode, even if it plays nothing like actual WoW PvP. Contrary to what many people were saying, you weren't actually forced to PvP. You could complete everything simply running around and looting, and save yourself the frustration of PvP by either running into the storm when you were done with that, or letting any player who attacks you just kill you and not give them the satisfaction of a struggle. Of course, that's not the intended gameplay loop, and it's not exactly an engaging one, so I can also understand why someone grinding through it with a completely PvE mindset would not be having a fun time. MoP Remix, on the other hand, while still a little bit disconnected from the rest of the game, is certainly closer to what we're used to. Of course, any Time Runner characters you create are stuck in this isolated Pandaria timeline, and you can't move them outside of it until this event is over. The characters are permanent though, and have actual classes and play as such, though there are clearly massive differences between how MoP Remix plays and how regular WoW plays. Those being the threads that allow your character to grow somewhat infinitely in power, as well as a heavy emphasis on eye level, and the various gems that you can slot into your gear. I didn't play a ton of MoP Remix at level cap, but I was very much getting the vibe that your class abilities served more as a vehicle to get your gems to trigger, which did the real damage. Aside from those gearing differences though, Remix didn't actually offer you any new content aside from like 3 minutes of questing at the start. You're just questing through content that's still available in retail today, and that will be available again soon when MoP Classic releases, except then you'll have the additional novelty of your classes actually playing how they did during Mists of Pandaria, which, at least for me, sort of just left me feeling like MoP Remix didn't actually offer anything new. Ultimately, I didn't really enjoy the core gameplay of Plunderstorm or MoP Remix, but I guess I appreciate Plunderstorm more as it felt smaller in scope, and so changing up how the game played didn't bother me as much. But again, I can absolutely see the other side of the argument. Now, touching on the lore and story for both for just a bit, both of them are ultimately extremely lackluster in that regard. Plunderstorm did introduce us to the Kegleg crew of pirates, but for this being WoW's first and potentially only pirate-themed patch, I feel like they dropped the ball on the potential there. We didn't really look at any pirate crews that already exist in the game, like the Bloodsail Buccaneers, nor was the location even really relevant. Like, it's the Arathi Highlands, and we can all see why that was chosen. It's a decently small and relatively flat zone with just enough points of interest to make for a good Battle Royale map. And on top of that, it's a fairly grassy zone, so it's reminiscent of Fortnite and won't cause immediate eye fatigue. It was clearly chosen for those reasons and not for any pirate-based reasons, otherwise we probably would have been set up in Tierregard Sound or Cape of Stranglethorn. Nor was the pirate theming itself even that apt. I get that we're looting and that vaguely makes you think of pirates, but that's about it. The lore value of Remix is similarly bare bones. You're just doing research for Eternus and the Infinite Dragonflight. We all know this is never going to mean anything, and even having them at the start of a character's experience is a bit of a false pretense. So both events were extremely underwhelming when it came to lore, but I have to give Plunderstorm the very slight edge here. Moving on, let's talk about rewards. Plunderstorm had a 40 renown reputation track and all the rewards that came along with that. These included 3 mounts, the entire Plunderlord's Finery Transmog, and the Plunderlord title, amongst many others. While a decent slew all in all, I would say the rewards felt very appropriate for the size of the event. I wouldn't really have expected more, but I'm also glad we didn't get less than what we did. I would say my effort in felt very appropriate for what I got. Remix's reward system is a different beast entirely. There are dozens, maybe even hundreds of rewards tied to it. Admittedly, the bulk of these are items that were already available in the game and will continue to be available afterwards, but it's still absurdly lucrative if you care about any of them. For me personally, the main things to grab were the 32 brand new mounts introduced, and I earned all of them very comfortably within 1 week. This actually left me pretty disappointed because for 30 of the 32, all you did was spend a very small amount of bronze, so I got no sense of accomplishment, and it just felt weird seeing my mount total go up so quickly for nothing. Along the way, I also grabbed all of the class arsenals and ensembles, just because there are some bangers in there, notably the mage and shaman ensembles. I also decided to multitask a little bit and knocked out 3 or 4 of the heritage armor sets that I still needed. I tried not to concern myself too much with anything else. I already owned all of the previously available mounts, and I try not to get too obsessive with collecting everything in the game, just all the mounts. I am a bit curious just what's going to happen with all the exclusive new rewards that were added that seemingly will disappear once Remix ends. I doubt they would all be retired forever, but I feel like there are also just too many for the trading post. I could be wrong though, we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, as far as rewards go, I will say that while Remix had a lot more on offer, Plunderstorm felt a lot more appropriate for what a limited time event should bring to the table. This next issue, or one might argue feature, is one that exclusively pertains to Remix, and that is the trivialization of old rewards. There are a ton of transmogs, toys, and mounts from Mists of Pandaria that have been made re-available through the singular ubiquitous bronze currency. Bronze comes from doing literally anything in MoP Remix, although of course there are more and less efficient ways to acquire it. But unless you're trying to fully upgrade your character for the event, it'd be difficult to argue that bronze is anything but abundant. Just the bronze you would naturally acquire from leveling, along with the 40,000 bronze bonus you get from hitting level 70, you'll wind up with about 80,000 bronze, which is enough to buy 2 of the most expensive mounts available from the vendor. Now, it'd be difficult to claim any of these are particularly hard farms today, even on retail. Even the Korkron Juggernaut mount from Mythic Garrosh was trivialized long ago when they added a scroll that lets you simply skip to the last boss. But the difference in effort required is almost insulting. Compare any of the world boss mount farms, for example. These currently have a 15-minute respawn timer with a 1% chance of dropping their respective mounts. That means you'll typically be waiting about 7.5 minutes for them to spawn, and doing so about 100 times. That maths out to about 12.5 hours for any of these mounts. Now in Remix, you can earn enough bronze for 2 of these mounts by leveling 1 character. Even if you're pretty slow about it, I'd say 6 hours is a pretty safe time frame to do so, which means you're earning these mounts in about a quarter of the time you would on retail. And there are other items that are far more difficult and unreliable to farm in retail that MoP Remix trivializes even further. Now many would argue that this is a good thing, this is part of the appeal of Remix, and that by getting flustered about it is just gatekeeping and being a fuddy-duddy. I don't entirely disagree, and in general I try to take the mindset that nerfs to the rarity of any given collectible aren't that important in the grand scheme of things. You need to look at the totality of them. But there is a level of frustration there that I think everyone can empathize with at least a little bit. I may make a full-fledged video on this topic at some point, because I do think it is a very interesting conversation to have. Anyway, on this point again, I gotta give it to Plunderstorm just because it's a non-issue there. Lastly, I wanted to talk about player degeneracy. And I'm not going to hold this against either of the game modes themselves, because I feel that wouldn't be fair. But I feel that Remix really showed that players need to be protected from themselves. For simplicity, bronze was made a universal currency, and the wisdom of this is debatable. But because it was, players were going to find an optimal way of farming it. And this took the form of farming frogs, and when those got nerfed, farming goats, and when those got nerfed, farming cranes. All of this to obtain bronze at a much faster rate than the normal gameplay loop suggested you were supposed to. And on the flip side of things, you had players who didn't or couldn't participate in these farms complaining about how they were now forever behind those who had. I think nowadays that's largely leveled off as people have maxed out their characters, but it certainly didn't paint a pretty picture of the community in the early days of the event. But that's more of a side note. In summary, due to the gameplay, a little bit due to the lore, and due to the rewards and the non-trivialization of old rewards, I found Plunderstorm to be a far more enjoyable experience than MoP Remix. That's just me though, and if you felt differently, more power to you. I don't think you're wrong. I don't think I'm right. Anyway, moving on to the drawing real quickly, I decided to go with Chen Storm Stout. I did think about doing something pirate themed, but there aren't really any notable pirate characters that I wanted to draw. I guess there's Mr. Smite, but I didn't want to go that obscure that quickly with this show. So instead I went for a representative from Remix. I've always loved Chen ever since Warcraft 3. He's obviously not the deepest or most complicated of characters, but he doesn't need to be. He's just a fun alcoholic panda. Who doesn't love that? And I love his dynamic with his niece Lily. I think they are one of the best parts of MoP in its entirety. I absolutely love doing their quests in Valley of the Four Winds, which I chose as the background here. And I think Blizzard loves Chen too. He got to be on the MoP box art. He got to be in the MoP cinematic. He is the Brewmaster character. I'd love to see more of him, but if not, I'm totally satisfied with what we did get. With that, I will wrap things up here. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye!